Thank you very much for inviting me. And I think I was just thinking a little bit and reflecting upon what am I doing in this forum, because usually CIOs or people who are responsible for delivering technology to get the businesses running do not get an opportunity to see this kind of a collection of partners coming together. And in many ways, I think it's very interesting to be standing here in front of you and sharing what is it that we worry about. And when you approach us, what is it that we would like you to think about? And what is it that keeps us awake through the night so that we can really deliver to the business and, more importantly, make the businesses more competitive? But before I proceed, let me also once again congratulate you all. I understand this is a fantastic celebration of a partnership between Crayon and all the partners coming together. So congratulations all of you on this wonderful evening, and I don't want to take away the celebratory spirit, so I'm sure you guys will have a wonderful time later in the evening. Partnership and what it means, perhaps one of the best examples that I came across in my life, in my professional life, was probably put together almost 15 years or so back. There was a small telecom company at that time, about $200 million in revenue or something like that, about 2 million customers. Wanting to scale and grow, and India as a country was the opportunity in front of it. And the one way that it actually scaled and grew was to build a very tight partnership, a partnership that was absolutely outcome oriented. And then, of course, there's no looking back on that kind of scale up that happened in that telecom industry. But then I've found out that the partnership model and the partnership ethos actually works at very small scales as well. Which is what I discovered when I was in the media industry for the past 5 years or so. And I also discovered that these models work very, very well as the technology also evolves and rapidly changes from what is today a very internet-style technology and a cloud-style technology, which did not exist 10, 15 years back. And finally, such an ethos and such a DNA of what partnership really means also works very well in very different geographies as well. And as I rolled out some of these models in Africa, we had about 17 countries in Africa where we rolled these out, I discovered that this ethos makes and plays a very important role there. So I started scratching my head to say, how do I boil all of these experiences over the past 15 or so years back, and through all these transformations, cross geography and cross technology boundaries, and sort of share with you what is it that keeps us awake and how do we want to look at partners. And I came up with a very simple model I'd like to call as the ABCD, the ABCD for what we would like to see partners looking at, because that's what keeps us awake. And if you could peek into our minds and get a sense of what the A, the B, the C, and the D are, then perhaps you could reorient some of your conversations, and perhaps you could think about how you approach us when you go to market with things that you have in your kitty. So the ABCD, without going through any large foreplay for this, I'll just put it out there. 4 things. What we are most worried about is an architecture, making sure that we can actually deliver not only for today, but also for tomorrow and the day after. And I'll talk a little bit more about this because we really want you guys to think about that, because that's a problem we are worried about. If you can get the architecture right, it has a direct implication on the business. Of course, the two go hand in hand. And I debated a whole lot as to where is the business first or architecture first. And I figured that as partners for you, you should get your architecture thinking absolutely crystal clear, because you're coming from the technology stables. But when you come with a very crystal clear architecture, then you can also have a meaningful business dialogue, because you need to think about the businesses we are trying to deliver to. And from that perspective, you need to understand that the one thing that worries us as technologists inside businesses is how to continuously innovate and drive disruptions. We want to make sure that we can bring in technology to disrupt and bring forward disruptive business models. So business is the B. The C is cost. Of course, we are worried about cost, and there's a lot of work that has to go on around cost, and we'll talk about that. And the final thing is D, which is delivery. And if things don't get delivered, there is no point in having a conversation or a partnership dialogue. So the ABCD, simply speaking, are architecture, business, cost, and delivery. I've just got one more slide because I spend a little bit of time on architecture, talk to you a little bit about it, and I'll come back to this slide and then open it up for questions. In architecture, the fundamental thing that is going on in the world of technology is the conversion from enterprise-style technologies to internet-style technology. And a very simple way to understand that is to look at this 2x2 matrix. Any technology you look at, and I've simplified it, if you really dumb it down, there's infrastructure and there's an application. And no matter what you say, most companies that exist today have got very large enterprise stack. The newer companies that are coming on are using internet stack. So infrastructure of the enterprise companies are typically running on private data centers, or they are possibly running on private clouds, and they're building their own private cloud. So they actually buy hardware and they actually run virtual machines on it and actually create virtualized compute and storage and so on and so forth. And especially with hyper-converged infrastructure coming out, there is a lot of private stuff that still happens. But of course, you've got virtual private clouds and so on and so forth that you can offer to the enterprises. So the enterprise style is very privatized, but the internet style is very public cloud oriented, and within public cloud you can actually now virtualize it. So the conversations you may want to have with enterprises have got to do with this hybrid of how do you manage in combination a blended or a hybrid stack of both enterprise and internet style infrastructure. At the applications layer, most of the enterprises will have some sort of COTS available. Only the newer companies are going entirely towards SaaS and are using open source to develop their own in-house capabilities. What you may want to be prepared for is to have a conversation with CIOs, CTOs, or CFOs to say, how do you straddle the balance between the two? And you know very well that most of the COTS players are also now moved to the subscription model, and they're moving their software licensing practices to pay by the drink or pay by the month model. Therefore, I know you talked about SAM and so on and so forth, which becomes very, very important. But if you can embrace E to I, and if you can have a conversation that not only says, here's what I'll do for you in the I space, but I understand your E problems, and I can actually bring to the table a combination of both E and I won't get into some of the details I put down there around predictive and so on and so forth. My main reason of putting this on the table is any CIO or any CTO in this country today is dealing with both. It's only the newer startups who are primarily hedged on the I stack, but most of the companies have got a lot of investments that have gone on in the E stack. So you should have a conversation that talks about E, talks about I, and talks about how to bridge the two. How does enterprise meet internet? And I don't want to make this a technical conversation, but I think in your conversations with CIOs and CTOs, this will be a good jargon to put in, at least to acknowledge that there is a mixture of both stacks. So with that in mind, when you can have a conversation of E to I, and you can have an architecture roadmap that shows how the hybrid infrastructure or the hybrid applications will start coming in, and how they may eventually go to a completely I stack, you'll be suddenly posed with a problem that says, now I'm completely running a cloud stack. If I'm running a cloud stack and I'm completely subscription based, what does that do to my TCO? And we'll talk about that in just a second. But while you're doing that, you need to be very cognizant of the business problem that is getting solved. Every business, I just come out of the media industry, which is obviously, going through a massive disruption with digital media and with business models around digital media, be it paywalls, be it digital advertising, be it subscription, and so on and so forth. How do you make money in digital content businesses? Whereas there was a lot of money to be made in traditional media and print media and so on and so forth. How do you make money? So you, as partners for the technologists in these businesses, if you can think through how the technology you bring to the table can potentially help them disrupt their business models, that will be extremely valuable. Of course, partner governance becomes very, very important. And there are many, many cases where newer I-style technologies, cloud stacks, have been brought to the enterprises, but the implementation was failed. And I've just come out of an experience recently on this one, where we actually bought a very, very, I wouldn't name the brand, one of the prominent brand of a SaaS stack, but we had a failed implementation there. That's because the business problem was not understood. The business process was not understood. Perhaps there was a disconnect between the business ask and what needed to be implemented and how it got implemented. Nothing to do with the underlying technology. That's probably okay. The SaaS is perfectly fine, or the PaaS is perfectly fine. But there was a failed implementation. So you need to have a very tight governance in place that engages with the business to make sure the deployment is right. And I have seen a failed deployment just not too long back. Then comes to cost. Cost is obviously something that's a prime concern. Everybody's trying to reframe their cost model. Of course, you'll do probably a lot of SAM work and you'll come down to optimization and so on and so forth. Vikas also mentioned outcome orientation. When I launched an outcome oriented model about 15 years or so back, I can tell you it worked very, very well. There were no blips, there were no huge costs for change requests, and there was a huge amount of elasticity that came in. Every time a change request comes in, if there's a cost that hits the business is very big, or if there is a cost that will hit the business, then you're going to find a natural friction. How do you build in elasticity into your cost models? How do you align your costs with the business outcome that the business is looking for? Be it revenue, be it total asset under management, be it profitability, anything. All of that makes a huge amount of difference if you can have that language and if you can talk that with the CIOs and the CFOs. So reinvent your cost model. I know you're constrained because you will have a certain cost model given to you by the technology or the product provider, but you need to think through how can that be bridged. And finally, delivery. It's all about delivery. If you're bringing technologies to the CIO or the CTO, if it cannot be delivered well, then it's of no use. And failed implementations can really be a deal breaker from a long-term partnership perspective. So these are the 4 buckets you may want to think about: architecture, business, your cost, and delivery, the ABCD. If you can think about these 4 things, I have found in all my experiences, be it in India or in this market, emerging markets of Asia and Africa, or be it in multiple industries, which happens to be telecom, media, and now I'm doing a bunch of work in financial services. These 4 things are what we are looking for in a partnership model. If you can get these 4 stitched, I think then the rest is history. It's just going to be glory for all involved. Okay? So with that, I'll conclude. I'll leave it open for a couple of questions, if you have any questions, depending on the time that's available. But in essence, this is a sum and substance of about 15, 16 years of journey here in India. Over to you. Okay? If there are no questions, I'll be around a little bit longer if you want to discuss. But together with Crayon and your partner ecosystem, do give it some thought and see how you can engage with the clients that way. Okay? Thank you.